Look at the sheer processing power of the adolescent brain. By their late teens, young people process information at lifetime peak efficiency. Yet in practice, that raw intellectual horsepower frequently collides with reality. Based on their performance in basic cognitive assessments, we expect teenagers to operate at the height of their rational faculties. They have the working memory and the inhibitory control needed for complex problem solving. But the data tells a different story. In international comparisons, high schoolers show lower educational achievement than middle schoolers. In daily life, they often fail to learn from immediate experience and make actively unsafe choices. Researchers often turn to literature to frame this contradiction. Charles Dickens captured this specific tension perfectly. Opening A Tale of Two Cities, Dickens wrote, "It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom, it was the age of foolishness." Cognitive scientists refer to this as a tale of two brains. The adolescent mind functions through a structural contradiction, where advanced reasoning on paper operates alongside poor reasoning in life. For decades, we explained this risk-taking through a narrative of imbalance. The assumption was that youthful, emotional passions mature rapidly and completely overwhelm a lagging, underdeveloped system of cognitive control. This idea has deep roots. It maps directly onto Sigmund Freud's early psychoanalytic distinction between primal, primary drives and secondary, rational processes. Over time, this evolved into a stubborn myth, the dueling dual systems. It paints a picture of a primitive reptilian limbic system locked in a wrestling match with the modern, rational neocortex. Modern neuroimaging proves this localized battle is biologically inaccurate. Risk-taking emerges from a decision-making architecture that is more rigid and calculated than the traditional model of emotional hijacking suggests. Brain mechanisms operate as unified systems of interacting networks. They do not function as isolated, dueling regions. When we study how these networks evaluate danger, we find something counterintuitive. Adolescents are completely aware of risks. In fact, surveys show they routinely overestimate both general dangers and their own mortality. This leads to the concept of hyper-rationality. Their risky behavior stems from literal, mechanical deliberation. They map out a decision by multiplying the probability of a risk by the magnitude of the potential reward. They apply this expected value calculus to real-life decisions. A teenager evaluating a problem behavior is often mechanically weighing variables rather than losing control to impulse. The problem with hyper-rationality is that it relies on a strict mathematical framework. They are doing the math correctly, but the equation itself yields the wrong real-world answer. To understand why this expected value math fails them outside the classroom, we have to look at how their brains process data. Adolescents lean heavily on verbatim processing. This is a high-resolution, detail-oriented method that tracks literal facts and exact odds. Verbatim processing is highly effective for linguistically mediated computations. It is the exact tool required for passing an algebra test or calculating a stated statistical probability. But real-world survival relies on gist reasoning. This is a fast, low-resolution filter that strips away the chaotic details and immediately flags a situation as broadly safe or unsafe. Verbatim processing calculates exact outcomes based on granular details. Just reasoning draws on experience-based intuition to immediately grasp the actual meaning of the context. The danger of adolescence stems from a developmental gap. They possess the raw computational ability to calculate the exact odds of a risk, but they lack the mature gist reasoning required to intuitively filter those odds into a safe decision. This separation between verbatim calculation and gist reasoning aligns with a framework proposed by cognitive scientist Keith Stanovich, who argues that raw intelligence is not the sole evolutionary engine of adaptation. As this chart demonstrates, we must separate intelligence from rationality. Intelligence, defined strictly as computational capacity and the ability to process expected value, rises sharply and peaks early in adolescence. Rationality, however, is a separate construct. It represents the execution of judgment, good sense, and intuitive gist. As the second line shows, rationality develops much more slowly and lags significantly behind raw intelligence. The intelligence curve is highly vulnerable. Because it relies on step-by-step mathematical calculations, it is easily compromised by the labile emotionality of social contexts. An adolescent might computationally know better, but the heavy emotional salience of a moment actively biases the variables they plug into their verbatim calculations, pushing them toward a suboptimal action. Teenagers are highly intelligent but highly irrational. They rely heavily on computations that are easily corrupted by context, rather than the stable, intuitive rationality that comes with experience. For a long time, the professional consensus viewed young adulthood as a period of cognitive stasis, the idea that mental development was essentially finished by the end of high school. Modern evidence disproves that. Deductive reasoning, mastery of proofs, and basic semantic organization actively evolve well into a person's 20s. We see this biologically. During this period, the brain prunes gray matter and expands the networks that connect various regions. This physical restructuring is the biological mechanism for shifting from verbatim dependence to intuitive gist capability. Because the adolescent brain is actively under construction, their fundamental methods of learning, reasoning, and deciding remain highly malleable and uniquely open to targeted intervention. This malleability has practical implications for educators, policymakers, and clinicians. We cannot rely on generic approaches. Early childhood interventions often fail to prevent teenage risk-taking because the target behaviors aren't developmentally relevant when the child receives the instruction. Research shows we can directly instruct students to extract the bottom-line gist from educational and social situations, building upward from explicit computation. Constructing this top layer of gist reasoning protects the adolescent's intellectual competence, preventing their cognitive abilities from being held hostage by emotional reactivity. Effective cognitive intervention scaffolds the transition from hyper-rational calculation to integrated intuitive rationality.